If you're looking for an opening to fool your opponent by selling them a trick, winning their queen in 10 moves or delivering mate, do not waste your time, because Benoni, which means son of sorrow, certainly is not that kind of opening. In fact, it is heavily strategic, able to quickly transpose into the tactical hell on the board. Starts with the old-looking c5, after which black quickly creates the queenside pawn majority, which will be supported by the monster bishop on g7. Black is mainly going for an initiative on the queenside, although having active pieces all over the board, gaining extra space on the king side is not impossible. Black also obtains a semi-open e-file where one of the rooks is going to put pressure on white e4 pawn. With the great control of the dark squares thanks to the fianchettoed bishop, Black also wants to secure the e5 square for one of their knights, which is sometimes done by advancing the g-pawn to g5. The main Benoni trademark, however, is the b5 pawn break, often supported by the knight, which maneuvers to c7, bishop to d7, rook to b8, and of course pawn to a6. On the other side, white's advantage is in the number of pawns in the center, securing greater maneuvering capacity. Now typically white moves the knight to c4 via d2, putting pressure on the d6 weakness. c1 bishop may join the attack via f4, forcing black to play passively. Finally, white wants to secure the e5 pawn break, often supported by f4. If the pawn advances to e5 and survives, typically white is dominating the board. In this video, you're going to see the main motives of both sides, highlighting as usual how to move our pawns and maneuver pieces, rather than memorizing moves. Actually, there will be no memorization at all. In the example on the board, there is a move for white to drastically increase activity of pieces. Of course, we're talking about the pawn break e5. It seems like white is hunting black pieces all over the board, while the d-pawn is becoming a real menace. Stockfish evaluates this as almost +4. Another 45 pawn advance example shows how it can happen with the support from the f-pawn. After queen d8, e5, d takes e, f takes e, and bishop f5, there is d6, and it is obvious who is ahead. Here we have a game played by Tal with black pieces, but he entered a lost position after a beautiful pawn sacrifice starting with the same pawn break, e5. Now the idea is to establish a strong outpost and blockade on e4, using it for one of the knights. Now black tried threatening on the queen side with knight a4, but it was all futile after bishop takes, pawn takes, and f take g6, f take g6, queen f7, and after king h8, knight c5. Thanks to the pin on d7 and the knight e6 threat, also knight a6 in some of the lines, black is completely lost, losing a piece at least. Here we do not have an immediate e5, but a task for white to improve their pieces and simply put pressure on the weakest points in black's camp. Looking at the d6 as the main weakness of black, we'd like to target it as many times as possible. And the ideal square for one of the knights to do that would be c4. The f3 knight can get there in 2 moves, starting with knight e2. And the consequences are really amazing. Our knight here gets attacked, but now we see some new possibilities for the same piece. It's going to c6. Now in the game played by 2 GMs, black went for knight b8, but after knight c6, knight takes c6 and pawn takes c6, and black's reaction rook takes b2, after knight e5, the engine is telling us that white is almost winning with +2.4. This is a position played by Pickett versus Judith Polgar, where white missed the opportunity to play b4. Point is, if queen takes, we play knight to b5, and the d6 pawn is under attack, while black cannot really take it thanks to the a8 rook hanging. On the other side, black queen is in danger because her way out of the white's camp is locked by the knight. For example, in case of rook d8, white wins after bishop d2. Queen needs to go to b2, after which bishop goes to c3 and the queen is busted. If black doesn't take on b4, well, they're going to face b takes c5, after which white gets a lot of extra pawns in the center and a much better game. In this position, black is threatening to continue advancing on the queen side with c4, then knight c5, and they become very active. Therefore, white uses the moment to play b4. And the idea being, if black pushes c4, first of all, black's d7 knight this time has no outpost on c5, while we can bring our knight to d4, getting centralized and threatening knight c6. A great example of black's potential problems may be seen after bishop b1, say knight e5, and knight to d4, when white is suddenly threatening f4 or g4, trapping either black's h5 knight or f6 bishop, or even the e5 knight. According to Stockfish, white is better plus 1.3. One of the main Benoni traits is the ability to run their queenside pawn majority and gain more space on that side of the board. The first pawn to advance to the 5th rank is certainly the one on the b file, and in order to get it there, black would like to set all their forces to support it. The first one is their knight going to a6. The drawback of this move is that it ignores the need of controlling the e5 square. Thus, some players may still prefer knight bd7. Now white supports the e4 pawn in order to move the knight to c4, then knight c7, and typically white advances a4, and then black plays b6. This move is interesting for two reasons. One is to prepare their c8 bishop to go to a6 and then trade itself for the c4 knight. And the other one is to prepare a6. Without b6, white can advance a5 as a response to a6. We'll speed up here, getting to the moment black makes another move in order to prepare expansion on the queen side, a6. Then rook b8, and finally b5. Normally the a-pawn gets traded and black plays knight e7. Black can push practically any of their pawns, but also keep their structure fully flexible with a very good piece play, and black is doing well here. In order to illustrate how important it is for black to advance b5 in Benoni, we are going to see how the same happens even when black knight is developed on d7, which makes the plan a bit more difficult to obtain. White moves their knight to the ideal c4 square and black immediately challenges it. In general, white wants to avoid this trade-off and either moves their knight to e3 or a3. The second is more popular because it also controls the b5 square. Couple of moves after, we have knight c8, freeing up the b-pawn, but also preparing a move like knight a7, after which b5 advance is finally secured. And this is what typically happens. White is forced to give up the exchange, otherwise knight e7 and white's knight is not able to escape the pin. Another trait of Benoni pawn formation is possibility of advancing c4, opening up the c5 square for their d7 knight to use and centralize. From that square, the knight is often able to jump deep into the white's camp on d3 or b3 square and cause a serious trouble. However, its purpose is also to hit the e4 pawn and discourage white from pushing f4. In this position, f4 is already played, and black is facing a problem of white advancing e5 soon. However, if their knight gets to c5, it may turn the table and black may end up taking over the initiative. But can black advance c4 at this point? Of course, in case a bishop takes c4, black is almost winning after queen b6, king h1, knight g4, say a5, knight f2, rook takes, queen takes. Here we do not have an immediate way to gain some material, but c4 can be played. This time we are getting our knight to c5, looking to get even deeper into the enemy's camp. After e5, d takes e, rook takes e5, queen d7, rook d1, black is actually accomplishing their plan, and after b5, we cannot complain about black's setup. Kingside pawn break is less expected to happen when a lower rated player uses Benoni, but among GMs and title players, the f5 pawn break is not a surprise at all. In this position, Ivanchuk went for knight fe8 in order to strike with f5 on the next move. But he wanted more, and soon after we can see him playing g5 and f4. Finally, he went for b6 in order to trade his light square bishop for the monster c4 knight. Black is doing well here, but if somehow they would succeed in getting the e8 knight to g6 and the one from c7 to d7, which is quite unlikely, they would be already strategically winning. As mentioned before, the e5 square is extremely interesting for one of the black's knights, and in order to maintain the square, sometimes they advance g5. It weakens the f5 square, but it is in most of the cases irrelevant, as white's pieces are far away from the king's side and from invading it. Now what happens after g5 is also interesting, because black keeps playing to completely overtake the dark squares, eyeing the f4 square with the other knight. To make things even more complicated for white, black even combined it with the f5 pawn break and c4 pawn advance, completely restricting white's pieces. In another situation when black is able to advance g5, following with knight h5, but this time black pieces are led by Kasparov, and he likes to put his queen on f6, assisting the idea of getting the h5 knight to f4, developing an initiative on the king's side. This was only a gallery of ideas and main plans, without which one cannot understand Benoni. However, there is more to cover in order to be ready to play it. We'll see that in another video dealing with a step-by-step intro and some anti-Benoni options that white can use.